as we get ready to talk to Connor Rodgers on the Western Hotline. Jeremy and Joe, good morning. Connor of NBC Sports, Jets pre- and post-game, and he's on the Western Hotline. Connor, good morning. Thanks for taking some time today.
Good morning, guys. No problem. How you doing?
Good.
Good.
Diana Rossini right there on the split between the Jets and Aaron Rodgers. It sure does sound like an organization that, in hiring Aaron Glenn, they might have wanted to do exactly this, which was wrench back the narrative, wrench back control, or at least the belief that they are, not just operating at the whim of a star quarterback, but instead trying to be a kind of a big boy organization again.
Yeah, I think that's the right read on it. I think it's hard to keep a guy like Aaron Rodgers unless he's playing at an incredibly high level when you're trying to establish a totally new culture, new mindset, new DNA. And, the Jets really didn't have any of those things under the previous coaching staff. They were kind of a rudderless ship. It was really the Aaron Rodgers experience, and, it felt like some of the things he came in with, made it that way, and some of the things Robert Saleh and eventually Jeff Ulbrich and Joe Douglas even allowed kind of let it get that way. And I think Glenn and the new GM, Darren Muji, even though this is Glenn's organization now, kind of saw it and said, listen, it's just not going to work that way. If we want to come in and establish things our way, it feels like that could become a game of tug of war. And that's really the underlying factor. I can't stress this other part enough. Financially, if they kept Aaron Rodgers this year and they weren't reworking the contract, the cap ramifications into 2026 and beyond would have just been catastrophic compared to what they're dealing with now, where they can kind of eat the cap hit into 2 different years, and it's relatively manageable in this salary cap world. So I think Rodgers just simply wasn't good enough anymore to justify all of those things.
Did it take, you think, ownership? For any of these, I'm sure it would have, but ownership signing off on calling it quits on this, or do you feel like maybe by the time last season ended that Woody Johnson and whoever is at the top of the organization might have just been done anyway?
I think they had a lean on the latter part, but this is something they talked about when they interviewed everybody. They brought this up. They asked plenty of candidates, like, hey, how would you handle the situation if you had the big chair? And it was something they were fascinated by, the thought process of the candidates that were interviewing for these jobs, of how they would handle it. Because the Jets know, especially Woody at the top, that they've fallen victim to being, a little bit tunnel vision, stuck in their own world, and they wanted to kind of see outside thoughts. And they interviewed a ton of people, as everybody knows, for both GM and head coach. So they had a good idea of who they were hiring, how they would handle this, and this has been discussed for a really, really long time. But I think at the end of the day, if who they hired really wanted to keep Rodgers, I think there was going to have to be a lot of things talked through with ownership and with him directly, and that was, of course, reworking the contract. I don't know how much Rodgers' media obligations ultimately played into this. I'm sure they don't love it, because when things are going bad, and the Jets had a really bad season, those things don't really help. I think some guys in the locker room probably look around and go like, man, do we need this right now? So I'm sure those things, supplement the problems. But, yeah, they seem to kind of make up their mind, but they did give the GM and head coach full autonomy to make this decision on their own.
Making this decision is, one, to start a direction change. Connor, how much of a rebuild, tear down, how drastic will it be? They've got the 7th pick. A 5-12 season's pretty bad. Is it going to be bring in a different veteran and try to get things going, because there are pretty good pieces on this team? Or is it about, stripping it?
Yeah, they're not going to do that, as far as I can tell, because that would mean, to me at least, contemplating the thought of trading at least one of Sauce Gardner or Garrett Wilson. If you're going to strip it and rebuild it, what you do is you try to get future assets, for anyone that you possibly can. And the Jets just don't view themselves as that. I don't think they view it as, hey, we're going to go spend all the money in free agency and we're going to trade all our picks to try to get Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, and we think we're going to win next year. I think you can kind of hang around in the middle a little bit while you're getting your feet under you. I wouldn't be shocked if they add a veteran quarterback in free agency, so they have Tyrod Taylor and a veteran quarterback going into this camp, which I know is uninspiring, right? The Jets are not going to be a top flight or probably even middle pack of the league quarterback room. And that's just an issue that they understood when they were moving on from Rodgers. But they feel like the rest of the roster can help them start to establish what they want to be on the defensive side of the ball, especially getting Jermaine Johnson back. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Jamien Sherwood in free agency in the middle of the field at linebacker for them. They're going to let DJ Reed walk in free agency, so they'll have one of the 3 corner spots open. But offensively, they have their guys from left tackle all the way to right guard. That's a really, really young group across 4. We'll see if they bring back Morgan Moses at right tackle. They want Garrett Wilson here for a really long time. Obviously, you have your 3 running backs in this backfield, headlined by Breece Hall. They need a tight end. They obviously need another player at quarterback, but yeah, I think they're comfortable with going with a bridge option this year, seeing what happens, and setting up a good team for when the day comes that they do have a young quarterback under center, because for so long they've done it the opposite way, where they've had a young quarterback under center walking into a bad situation where they had to be the savior, and that's why it never worked for any of these guys, whether it was Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, Zach Wilson, and they had their own faults in those eras, but the Jets didn't help those guys either.
Connor Rodgers with us, also the co-host of the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, which is a great listen. I would definitely recommend it during draft season. So would you then, with that being said, it's funny, I was kind of almost half kidding about Tyrod being the starter for the Jets this year, but maybe there's a real chance of that. Do you feel like it's definitely a veteran, though, that will go with them? Would you rule out them picking a quarterback at 7 or even moving up for one right now?
I'd be really surprised. I'd never say never, because the draft always has a few surprises, but the supply just doesn't really match up for a team like that unless they're convinced that Cam Ward, who I like, unless they're convinced Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders, who I don't even think I would take Shadur Sanders at 7, to be honest with you, and he won't be there anyway. Unless they're convinced one of those guys is the answer to the point where you're trading, say, 3 ones, like your current one and your next 2 ones, to go up to number 1 overall to take them, and that'd be really surprising with a new regime. Then I don't see them doing that, and then you kind of find yourself in the middle where, say they take Jackson Dart or Will Howard or Kyle McCord or whoever it may be on day 2, those guys aren't going to start out of the gate. That's not realistic at all to expect from that. So Tyrod's money is guaranteed. He was really, really loved in that locker room last year. The thing with Tyrod is nobody in the organization or really in the NFL, they don't think he can't play. That's not the question. Can you get middle of the pack quarterback play from Tyrod? Which every time he comes in to play for a team, that seems to be fine, even as recently as with the Giants. The problem is, can he stay healthy? Because he typically can't. So I think that's why you probably need another veteran quarterback, where you'd need 2 bridge guys almost in this situation. And then you could still draft a young guy later on. You're not going to do that at 7, but you could still do that later on, see what you have in him, and you kind of put your foot forward that way. So, like I said, it'll probably be lacking. The Jets have gone for flash at quarterback over the last couple of years. Zach Wilson at 2, the big trade for Aaron Rodgers. It feels like they are going to go the complete opposite direction this offseason, barring a huge surprise.
Connor Rodgers on the Western Hotline. Connor, before we let you go, 4 Nations, you digging it?
Oh, it's amazing. What do you guys think? I love
it, man. I love it.
It's exceeded expectations. We've dubbed it a 4 Nations Friday. It's been great.
I think everybody was, not everybody, but people were like, I don't know. It's not the Olympics. It's obviously the 4 teams, because it's an NHL event and they need to fill the rosters. And then all of a sudden you see Jack Hughes and Austin Matthews on the same line, and you see the Kachucks together. Mind you, I'm a huge Rangers fan, so I'm always rooting against these guys, and now you're rooting for them. And Canada-Sweden was awesome in overtime the other night. It's just, I think why it's so good, guys, besides you get to see what we haven't seen before, which is always really, really fun, is that I think it's really even. I know the USA ran away with it in the third period last night, but I think Finland's they have loaded at forward. I think every single game is going to be really, really good, at least for the first 2 periods.
Yeah, I agree. I do have one more thing for Connor here, because he also does the fantasy football happy hour.
Okay.
And Connor, I am a crazy person enough that I have a draft tomorrow. So
oh my God.
I don't know that you're going to be able to tell me early enough who I should pick at 13. But I'm almost wondering just who the number 1 pick is at this point. This league is supposed to be nuts, by the way. It's not, it's meant to be a February draft.
So is this a rookie draft or a total redraft?
No, it's total redraft. So you would pick rookies not knowing what team they're going to be on.
Right.
Which is going to make it more risky. But yeah, I'm
oh man.
I mean, The top pick is who? I mean, you probably have not thought about this question one time yet. I'm sure I'm the first.
We actually, on Radio Row, we brought it up briefly because we were kind of just kicking it around with the season Saquon had. Like, is it the year where everybody's so trying to be risk adverse and be careful about taking a running back number one overall, no matter how good they are?
Yeah.
I think the first three picks will be Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Saquon Barkley. I don't know the exact order. I would guess that order.
Yeah.
Depending on your scoring settings, of course, as well. But I think that's ultimately how it's going to go. I tried to get into a best ball draft this week as well because I'm insane like you, just to kind of see how it goes, like a $10 play. It didn't fill yet, but I'm just fascinated to see how things go. That's why I want to get one in the tank here.
Yeah, I just want to know what it feels like when Bucky Irving is the first player I draft in a fantasy draft, because that might be tomorrow. That might be tomorrow.
Or Ashton Genty, honestly,
sure.
A guy that has not played an NFL snap. That's where we're at right now.
Yeah. Connor Rodgers of NBC Sports and Jets pre and post and everything else as well. The fantasy football co-host of the NFL Stock Exchange. He does everything. Connor, thanks so much for taking some time for us.
Oh, great talking to you guys. Have a good one.
You too.